All right, now it seems like I'm completely wired up. And I feel like the old guy here because I sort of, my story ends in 2007 where most of the others start. So I'm going to talk with how to compete with companies that are 100 times larger than yourself, which is something I've tried. And I have 3 key decisions. The first was, of course, to found the company, most important. Then we had to change the strategy completely in 2001, and then in 2004 we expanded using the crisis back then. But so I was actually took the opposite route of Morten. I started in the States. Back in 1996, I was living in Los Angeles as a programmer, and suddenly the internet exploded. And we heard about megatrends before, and when I saw the internet, there was no doubt in my mind that the internet was a megatrend. Yeah, you may laugh, that was not obvious to everybody. I mean, the newspapers didn't believe it, for instance, but I was sure that the internet was going to change everything. And I saw this as an opportunity to, here I could create a company. And I started a couple of different websites and things. And one of them was Jobindex. And there wasn't any analysis. I got the idea and created a website during the weekend and launched it. That was sort of it. Including this crazy logo, which was one of the things I did during the first weekend. But one of the advantages I had was that I was in the States, so a lot of things were going on in the States, nothing was happening in Denmark. But I could see that the newspapers were very fast on creating their own job sites with the adverts on the internet. And that is how I got the idea of creating a job aggregator, collecting all the adverts, because that meant that no matter how many adverts the newspapers put online, I would still have the largest collection of job adverts. And that was probably the most important decision I made, because that concept has proven really, really powerful. And today there are lots of job aggregators, but Jobindex was really the first job aggregator in the world. And that was a key decision to use that business model and then have a lot of free job adverts, but then charge a fee if you wanted your adverts on top of the others. That was basically the business model of Google, but this was before Google was invented. But that idea was really, really powerful. I made the mistakes of having twins at the same time as I created. That was not recommended, but the company started to grow. I started hiring a salesperson in Copenhagen. We called ourselves the smallest multinational company in the world. And the company grew slowly, and after 5 years we grown to about 15 people, sort of a startup. But before that, the internet boom had happened, and there were some companies that got really a lot of venture capital. We never managed to get venture capital. There was very little venture capital. Michael was one of the only venture capitalists in Copenhagen at the time, but he didn't really want to invest in our. So we had no venture capital, but yeah. And we had a competitor called Stepstone that made an IPO in Norway and raised 1.6 billion Norwegian kroner, and then started to expand. And after a year and a half, they grew to 1,300 people. So suddenly we were competing with a company that had 100 times more employees and 1,000 times more money than when we had. That was at a time where we had a lot of pressure. And even if that was not enough, we had the dotcom bust. And then we have had September 11th, which completely closed the recruiting market. Nobody wanted to hire anybody. So we were, at the end of 2002, we had something like 20,000 Danish kroner left in the bank account, and were losing money. So it was time for a new strategy. And instead of being the cheapest job site, we decided to focus on service. But I'm going to give you a recipe here for how to compete with companies that are 100 times larger than you are, and how to basically create a strategy. Because our original strategy was to be very cheap, do a self-service model, and I was sure that I could create a company that was more efficient than the newspapers. But it turned out it didn't really work, because StepStone had all this money. They could, afford to run big marketing campaigns and be really cheap. So they ran away with all the with all the customers. So this is a 5-step process. Focus on your own customers. Pick one of 3 different strategies. Find some commonalities among your customers and focus on one group of customers. Then be a challenger and win market share. First of all, we were the first. We didn't have any. All the medium-sized companies choose StepStone. All the public companies choose something called Job Match, which Michael ran. But because we were the first company around, we had gotten some large customers. Our original focus was to focus on small customers so that we didn't want to pay a lot of money. But suddenly we ended up with customers like Maersk, Novo Nordisk, Grundfos, Lego. And those, of course, were the customers we focused on. And it's a lot easier to sell more to the existing customers than to find new ones. And StepStone were running with all the other customers. At one point, I told my salespeople that I don't want to hear anything about StepStone customers, because we don't making any money on them. We're only making money on our own customers. Then you have to pick a strategy. You can either, and if you have read Porter, there's 3 basic strategies. You can either be a market leader, you can find a technological niche, or focus on specific customers. Typically, you cannot be the market leader as a startup. We weren't the market leader. If you can create something which is faster or better or smarter or something like that, where you can do something that nobody else can do, then you can find a technological niche. But typically, as a startup, you have to pick the last strategy. Find a group of customers that have something in common, and then be better at serving that group of customers than anybody else. And since we had customers like Maersk and Lego and so on, it wasn't a difficult choice to say, well, let's focus on the large companies instead. So we called our customers and asked, well, why are you buying from us when StepStone are that much bigger and doing better than us? And it turned out, well, first of all, they liked us. And these companies, they don't change their companies because something else is coming along. They're quite stable and long-term. And then they liked our service because we had good service. It wasn't difficult to create good service when you only had 10 customers, but that was something they liked. So we decided, well, I mean, if that's what they like, then why not try to become better at that? Why not proofread the adverts? Why not make them look nice? So let's do all other sorts of things that we can do. So we decided, forget about being the cheapest. We want to have the best service and highest quality. That also meant that we had to discard some of the customers that have chosen us because we were cheap. So we simply raised our prices. The salespeople weren't very happy about that. But I said, if they don't want to pay, there's nothing to do about it. We have to raise our prices. So we made things like list of 5 customers that we want to lose, and when they we lost them, we said high five and so on. It turned out they came back a couple of years later, and then they were willing to pay the prices that we charged. So we said we're going to be best on service, and those that are not willing to pay for that, we're going to forget about that. And then when you have a base, you can use that to build market share. It turned out it wasn't only the big companies that wanted good service. The medium-sized companies also wanted that, and that helped us expand and grow. Fortunately, the crisis in 2001 and 2002 stopped in 2003 after the Iraq war. Then the market started to grow, which was very fortunate. So we made money in 2003, and we made money in 2004, and at that time we had grown to these 20 people here. And that was when we made a third critical decision. We decided at the end of 2004 to take half of the money that we had made and half of the money that we had in the bank and run a television campaign. So that was 2 million Danish kroner, which was a lot of money for us at the time. I later found out that a 2 million kroner television campaign is nothing. It's a really small campaign, but we thought it was big. And we did a lot of things to try to make it look big. So we sent mails to our customers and say, on Saturday at 19:30 you can watch our... We also had advertisement on buses, but only in the cities where we had customers, not in the old. So we made a small campaign and tried to make it look good, big. And then we sent mails to all our customers explaining about this huge campaign. We got quite a lot out of that because this was after 3 years where nobody had advertised on television. So suddenly it created a mark. You know, one of the fathers of one of our employees called his son and say, well, you really have to watch out because there's a big company called Jobindex now entering the market. And he said, well, that's actually the company that I'm working for. So, so it made us look big, and that meant that the 2 million that we spent, we got that into the company in new money from new customers. That meant that the next year we could spend 5 million Danish kroner, and that actually came back again with new customers. And then suddenly the shortage of people started, and there was a lot of new customers that wanted employees and advertised all over. So in 2006 we spent 10 million kroner on an advertisement. And you can see the knowledge of the company here. When we started back in 2005, we were actually the least known job site in Denmark. But slowly, when we spent more and more money on advertisement, our brand recognition grew. And at the end of 2006, we were the best known job site in Denmark. And that was when we made the IPO in 2007 at First North at a value of 600 million kroner. And just 6 years earlier during the crisis, there was one of our competitors that offered to buy the company for 5 million kroner. I'm happy that I turned that down. And then in 2014, we actually bought our own old competitor, Stepstone Denmark. So now we run Stepstone in Denmark. They're still really big in Germany and a lot of other countries. So, but in the meantime, so that sort of got us to the IPO. But in the meantime, all the newspapers joined forces against us. So Berlingske, Jyllands-Posten, Politiken, and TV2 joined forces and created Jobzone and to compete against the Jobindex. And if you want to hear that story and how we moved from being one of the big job sites to being the market leader, you can go and see the speak that I did at one of the first Nordic Growth Hackers, which is on the Nordic Growth Hacker website. So there you can get the second half of the story, if you like that. Mm-hmm. To sum it up here, 3 pieces of advice to startups. Make sure you have an image. Forget about mass marketing unless you have a lot of millions, and find some loyal employees. First of all, it's important to have an image because that means that people can remember you. This newspaper article you saw before was the first newspaper article that was written about Jobindex, and I was, telling the journalist about this new company and what we could offer to companies and this new service and on this new thing called the internet. And that was not the story he wanted to write about. He wanted to write the story about this crazy guy who thought he could compete against the internet, the newspapers. So. And after a while, I sort of accepted that and say, yeah, we are a small company. We are the small company that are competing against the big companies. But we're still very serious. And that sort of gave us the image that meant that people knew who we were and could remember it and so on. We also did things like make it personal. For instance, that's the second part of it. We used television marketing, but that was only when we became pretty large. We didn't do that in the beginning. And the truth is that mass marketing doesn't really work unless you have really a lot of money. It doesn't work as well as personal marketing. I mean, when you only have 10 customers, you can send them Christmas presents with the handwritten postcards. I still write handwritten postcards to all my employees nowadays. When we started creating newsletters originally, all our competitors signed them, you know, your Stepstone team or something like that. You know, I thought that was like, since it was a one-person company, I thought it was, you know, you wouldn't want to write Jobindex team. So I just signed them Kaare Danielsen, and then I started getting mail saying that, you know, that's actually nice to get mail from a real person. So even today, where we send out 300,000 emails every morning, they're still signed Kaare Danielsen. So we try to make it personal, and that actually works a lot better. And you can do that as a small company. You can't do that as a large company. That's a lot harder. So make your marketing personal. Make sure you have personal connections with your customers and users. And finally, find some really loyal employees. Those people you saw on the first picture, they were really willing to fight for the company during the 2 hot years in 2001 and 2002. We had no salary increase. They knew we were running out of money, and nobody was leaving the company at all. We didn't lose one employee during that time period, even though it was tough and so on. In the second picture, a third of the people on the second picture are still with the company today, 15 years later. So, if you want to start a company, you must find people that are willing to work hard and fight for the company, even though they can make more money elsewhere, because you typically don't have money to pay, unless you have a lot of venture capital, which is also a possibility. So to summarize, it's really exciting to start a company. It's not for everyone. It takes a certain mentality, and there are easier ways to make money, that's for sure. Especially easier than creating a job site and compete with the newspapers. But remember, it's difficult to be small, but it's actually even more difficult to be large. When I was a small company, you know, I didn't understand, why don't they just wipe us out? You know, they could compete with us easily. Now I'm a big company, I understand. Now I see entrepreneurs that have some great idea, and I say, well, that's a really great idea. Unfortunately, we can't copy it because we don't have time for that. I mean, I'm running a big ship now, and we can't compete against some small boat. I mean, the only thing we can do is let them take some market share and hope that they don't get too big. And that's what you can, you should have that in mind when you start a small company that competes against large companies. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thank you.